probably right.
Okay, let's go ahead and get started. So today,
Evaluation.
yeah, but you have to create a new document. So you'll open up your Google Docs and create a new document. Okay, we're making cinnamon rolls today, and the reason we're doing that is tomorrow you're going to be actually making the dough. So let's go ahead and get started. The recipe's behind me. It's also in your Google Classroom. And are you having trouble getting?
Is this the lab?
You're in the lab evaluation, asking you how your cinnamon rolls turned out. So that would be for next Wednesday. Ready? Are there Oh. Should be there. Did not come for period 5?
No.
Cinnamon roll demo notes. There you go. And then you have to create your own document.
Okay.
Okay, here we go. So we're making cinnamon rolls. And we'll wait until you guys are ready. Okay, so we're making cinnamon rolls tomorrow, the dough. So today I'm going to show you how to do that. And the recipe's behind me. It's also in your Google Classroom. It's also on LSHS Cooks, our website. So you're welcome to look at any of those places. And if you decide you want to make cinnamon rolls at home, I'm going to tell you some alterations if you don't have the same equipment and things like that. So it starts out in a large bowl containing 2 1/4 cups flour and yeast. And so you're just using all-purpose flour. Renee has measured out the full amount that the recipe calls for, which is 4.5 to 5 cups. We don't need that much to start out with. You start out with about half the flour. So I'm just going to dump about half the flour in there. And then the other ingredient that goes in here is yeast. And so yeast, it will tell you on most recipes 1 package of yeast. That means one of these little squares. If you're not sure about that, it actually tells you on the side of bags of yeast. In class we use a bag of yeast, or sometimes you'd use a jar of yeast. It tells you how much one packet of yeast is. It says right here, 2 1/4 teaspoons. And so 2 1/4 teaspoons of yeast is the same as one of these little packets. In class we don't use the little packets because they're about 10 times more expensive than just buying the bulk yeast. So that's what we're going to use in class. And it's important that you do understand how much yeast is in one packet because there is a chance that you are going to use yeast like in our class. And I know that when you guys made yeast dough those rolls, there was maybe a mix-up and you got more yeast than you planned. And so if you get too much yeast, it will rise really, really fast and then the rolls just fall. And nothing else will happen. So you do want to go accurately. So that's all that's going to go in our mixer bowl for now. Oh, by the way, in my mixer bowl I have the hook attached. It's going to work the best for dough because we want our dough to actually be kneaded. You don't have to knead the dough by hand with this recipe, but you do need the correct attachments. Keep in mind that this one is only used for what? The whisk is only used for which several ingredients? Does anybody think about an ingredient you might use the whisk for?
Heavy cream.
Heavy cream. So whipping cream and egg whites typically. Things you want that are liquid that you want to make fluffy. Okay? And this is used for just basic mixing. It's the paddle. And then finally the hook is for dough. Like this. That's heavy. So it says in a medium saucepan, we're going to heat up 1 cup of milk. I'm going to add all my ingredients and then I'm going to and then we'll talk about what you do with each one of them. So we start out and we're having milk, 1/3 cup of butter, salt and sugar. And so we're going to heat those up on the stove until they're just barely, until the butter is almost melted, but not all the way. And while that's melting, I'll tell you what the purpose of all those ingredients are. Okay, so in our recipe, it calls for milk. Milk is for moisture, but it's also for in the protein in milk make your dough richer and more flavorful. And so that's why it's not water, but milk. And when recipes just call for milk, they're typically asking you to provide 2% milk. That is has the right amount of fat, and that's almost every recipe that calls for milk is asking for 2%. If you've got something else at home, it doesn't mean they can't use it. It just means that you may end up with results that are a little different than what was intended. And other ingredients, butter. We use butter instead of margarine because butter provides more flavor. Also the fat in butter is going to give you a tender crumb. And so in other words, when you break open your cinnamon roll, it's going to be tender and moist inside. And part of that is from that added fat from the butter. If you were to use vegetable oil instead, it wouldn't be as flavorful. And sugar, in yeast dough, sometimes there's sugar and sometimes there isn't. Sugar helps the yeast to grow, which is an advantage. And of course, this recipe has a whole third of a cup of sugar, so it's going to be very sweet. When we make pizza dough in 2 weeks, you're going to have dough that doesn't call for sugar. And it isn't always necessary. But if you want a sweet dough, then it will have sugar in it. And then salt. Salt is for flavor. And so even if you don't think that salt is necessary, or someone is on a low-fat diet, or a low-salt diet, it's still important to add some salt to your yeast dough because you want to have some flavor. I have a relative who makes yeast dough without salt because she wants to be on a low-salt sodium diet. But the problem is that this only has half a teaspoon of salt. That's not very much, and by the time you divide that out, it makes at least 10 cinnamon rolls. So really, you're just getting a couple granules of salt. But the flavor in her rolls there's no flavor because salt carries flavor. No matter what you're making, it will make something more flavorful. So salt is really important in the recipe. We're going to check our stuff on the stove. And by the way, the reason why I'm not heating this long enough to melt butter is that yeast, if it gets above 125 degrees, it gets killed. And so I don't want to kill the yeast because yeast is actually living organisms, and when you get them wet, they start to grow. And they start to send out carbon dioxide, which is what's going to make our dough rise. And so if I were to kill the yeast, that means my bread is not going to rise. It's important that the yeast will grow better though if the liquid that's added to it is heated up. And so that's why I'm heating it on the stove, is to have warm liquid to add to my yeast so that it will help it to grow better. But again, if I boil that liquid or get it so that it's so hot that all the butter melts, then I'm probably going to kill the yeast. And so that would be a disaster. My rolls would be very flat and unflavorful. So we'll give it about another 30 seconds, heat up a little bit more, and then we'll be adding it to our mixer. If you don't have a mixer at home, you're welcome to make it on your own with just a mixing bowl and a wooden spoon. I made this for years without a mixer, and that worked out fine too. If you're a person who really doesn't like to mix and you've got a KitchenAid, go ahead and use that. But if not, don't worry about it. Just mix it yourself. It will turn out fine. Do you guys have any questions so far about making yeast dough? Who's made yeast dough before? What'd you eat? Oh, you did. I love them. Oh, nice. Very good. Who else made homemade dough? What'd you make? What's that? Yeah, that's nice. So here's our warm liquid. Again, the butter is probably about a third the original size, so it's not all the way melted. I'm going to carefully pour this in here. Again, I don't want it too warm because that will kill the yeast. And then make sure that you set your pot down on a hot mat, please. So we're going to go ahead and start mixing it with the mixer. And because it's got the dough hook on, it's made for dough. It's not going to completely stir as well as if I had had this attachment on. However, it does. It's kind of a hassle to change over in between cooking. By the way, the reason I'm videotaping today is just for absent students so that they can watch the videos, links, and be able to take notes. And so you're going to mix it well. And the next ingredient is the eggs. While it's finishing up, I'm going to grab some eggs. And when it's well blended, we'll go ahead and turn it off. And I do still have a little hunk of butter in there, but it will be stirred up when we go along. By the way, when you crack open eggs, if you crack them up on the counter, then there's less chance you're going to get little pieces of shell broken off into your bowl. But if you're concerned about that, you can always crack your eggs into a separate bowl. Eggs are full of protein and they're full of fat. And so the protein is going to make my dough stronger. The fat is going to give me a tender crumb. And again, when we talk about fat, fat's not a bad thing. Fat is just, we call butter fat, we call the yolks fat. It's just,
in your belly.
well, no one wants a fat belly. But really, we talk about proteins, carbohydrates, and fats. And fats do the same thing in recipes, just depending on, which fat you use. It's depending on what flavor you want, or what, sometimes they have a little bit different quality. But really, we're concerned about the fat and getting fat into our recipe, especially for yeast dough, because we're concerned about the outside of the dough and if it will brown. And so, like the milk, one of the reasons we use milk instead of water is that milk will help your dough to brown really beautifully in the oven. And so again, it's just the fat that's in the milk that causes it to brown. And sugar also will help it to brown. Anyway, we mix that up nice and well. And then we're going to gradually add the remaining flour. And this yolk, there's one yolk that doesn't want to mix. It will. And then we're not going to add all the flour at one time again, because you never know how much you're going to need. Last period, Renee had measured out 5 cups of flour for me, and I ended up using almost 6 cups. It just depends on the weather and all sorts of stuff. And so every time you make dough, you may use a different amount of flour. Even different flours have different amount of moisture in them. It totally varies. And if the flour doesn't want to mix in, you can always stop the mixer and use your rubber scraper. And the way I'll know if I have enough flour in here is that my dough will pull together into a ball. It won't be sticky. Right now there's still clumps of dry stuff, and I can actually see the tracks where my mixer's been, so it's still too moist. But it will actually form into a ball of dough. Another half cup, 3/4 of a cup. While we're mixing this, we can go ahead and talk about the filling that we're making. So tomorrow you're going to be making your dough, and then the following day you're going to roll it out, and you're going to mix your filling with it. And I'm going to show you how to make the filling today, because I won't be here on Wednesday to show you how to roll out your dough or make the filling. So when you make day 3, and we let it rise again, and then it bakes. So yeast dough rises twice. Still kind of sticky. And so on Thursday is day 3 for you, and that's the day when you will eat your cinnamon rolls.
Why does it take 3 days to make cinnamon?
Because we only have 55-minute or 1-hour classes. And so in order to get, you have to have, usually rising takes an hour, 2 hours, so it just wouldn't work. Even at Snow Isle, it would probably take a couple days to make yeast dough, because one day you make your rolls, you set the dough aside to rise, and then you shape them, and then the next day you come back and you bake them. But there has to be that rising time in between. If you decide to skip a step, your dough isn't going to taste as good. And the dough also won't be as strong because it hasn't had the 2 times to rise. And so if you make it at home, you can start, 3 or 4 hours in advance and just, spend a little bit of time making your dough, and then come back to it and let it shape it, and then set it aside again for at least an hour, and then so that it doubles in size, and then you bake it. Okay, now we're just going to knead our dough, and so we're just going to run the mixer for about 3 minutes until it's smooth. Right now it's a little sticky looking still, but it will get smoother as it beats. And while we're doing that, we're going to make our filling. And so the filling of the cinnamon rolls, the heart of the filling is butter. Butter is going to give it a delicious flavor. And then sugar, of course, brown sugar is for flavor. But the problem with butter and brown sugar is when you heat them, they also melt. And so you don't want the filling melting and rolling right out of your rolls. So one of the tricks that bakers use is they use a little bit of flour in the filling. And the flour will bind with the butter and the sugar and make it stay in between the spirals of the cinnamon rolls instead of having it fall out. And of course cinnamon. Cinnamon is for flavor. And then some people also add raisins or walnuts. And so that's something that, or pecans. And people could add that as well. Our recipe, some of them show it, some of them don't. You can tell that my dough is changing because you can even see my mixer is fighting to mix. But you also, I don't know if you can tell, it's becoming smooth and elastic. And so it's much smoother. It doesn't stick to my fingers. So we'll give it just about another minute and it will be ready. My mixer's also fighting hard, which is a hint that we've developed some elasticity in our dough. Yeah, I think my mixer's had enough. So we'll turn that off and deal with that in just a second. Let's finish our filling. See how smooth it is now compared to before. So our dough's ready. The filling, you're going to mix it with this thing. Anybody know what it's called? Almost. Pastry blender. This is a pastry blender. And so you're going to use it when you want to have chunks of butter remaining in whatever you're mixing, or chunks of fat. And so it's used to make biscuits and pie crust, anything that you want flaky. We're using it for the butter because we don't want the butter completely broken into such tiny pieces that if the butter is broken into tiny enough pieces, this filling becomes gluey and hard to spread on our cinnamon rolls. So if we just leave this so that there's some big chunks of butter, it spreads much easier. It's not going to look as pretty until it melts in the cinnamon rolls, but it really doesn't, that's the part that doesn't matter so much. If you can't get it spread on the rolls, it's not going to be any good either. And again, it's okay if I'm touching the dough or if I'm touching the filling right now, because this isn't ready to eat. It will be baked in the oven. And so I want the butter a little bit smaller, but not so small that it becomes indistinguishable from the other ingredients. A problem a lot of students have is they mix this so much, and it looks great. It looks so smooth and glossy, but then they can't get it spread. And so you want it to have chunks of butter, and the butter will melt in the oven, and so that's not an issue. block is going to be for your dough. If you do not have, you're making it home and you don't have Ziplocs, just use a glass bowl. And if you don't have cooking spray to line the back, you could use butter, you could use margarine, shortening, vegetable oil, doesn't matter. You just need some fat. And then we're going to remove the dough from the hook. It's definitely a lot stronger than it was. And then you're going to make sure, why do we want to get all the air out of the bag before we seal it? You smell me.
Oh, you don't want to explode that.
You're right. When your dough rises, it will put pressure on the seams of the bag. And I've seen bags totally blown out all the sides. And the problem is then the dough gets really dry and crusty where it comes in contact with the air. So you want to just have it like this. Any questions about making cinnamon rolls or the filling? So tomorrow you're going to make your dough like this, and then I'm going to demonstrate how to roll out cinnamon rolls. I'll add the filling because I won't be here the next day to show you when you are actually making them. And who knows if the sub will know how to do that or not. And right now you're going to, when you've got 10 facts, you're going to attach this or add it to the assignment in Google Classroom and then hand it in to me or turn it in. If you don't know how to do that, let me know. And then you're going to do the Chapter 3 worksheet on yeast. And anyone who's sitting here is welcome to move back to your regular spot.
We can